3-to-1 counterpoint, not to be mistaken with third species counterpoint. This is something that some teachers of species counterpoint skipped, but some also did not, and for a good reason. 3-to-1 counterpoint uses a triple meter, usually 3/4 notes of counterpoint for a dotted half note pulse in the cantus firmus. This makes 3/4 time, which is usual, but sometimes 3/2 is used where you have dotted whole notes in the cantus and then you have half notes in the counterpoint. Beat 1 is a downbeat, and now beat 2 and 3 are both metrically weak. The dissonances are able to be used on the weak beats just like before. This is the cantus firmus in D Dorian found in the previous video. This is by Albrechtsberger. He used this to teach Beethoven in the 1790s. This is Beethoven's 3-to-1 counterpoint response. Notice the voice crossing. So we have the voice on the top of the counterpoint and the cantus is below. And then right here all of a sudden the counterpoint dips below the cantus and then goes back over it. So there's a voice crossing right there. The voices cross when the counterpoint is at a fairly low point in the melody, while simultaneously the cantus is reaching its high point, creating an overall contrary motion to both of the voices. So let's take a listen to this and then we'll analyze what's going on. You have consonances on the downbeats and the weak beats, and you have dissonances only on the weak beats. So later on when we start to interweave some more tonal methods into this, we're going to have some more things where we can do some more stuff. But for these exercises, we're just going to be using the rules in this video and compiling from the previous videos to slowly build up an understanding of how to use and understand counterpoint, kind of one step at a time instead of just leaping into it and adding a bunch of stuff and then having to think about a bunch of stuff all at one time. It's slowly building up to a bunch of stuff. As you can see, Beethoven is taking advantage of the dissonant passing tone, approaching and leaving it by a step, regardless if it's on beat 2 or 3. So the dissonant passing tone is still left over from 2-to-1 counterpoint. So in this video, there will be another dissonance introduced, so stay around. So as you see, now that we have 3-to-1 counterpoint, we have those 2 extra weak beats. So as long as the dissonance is on one of those weak beats, 2 or 3, then it's totally fine. And it also has to be approached and left by a step in the same direction. So you see where it falls by a step, here's our dissonance, and then it falls away from the dissonance in a step. When we look at Beethoven's counterpoint, we see that it has 2 high point Fs. You can see in 2 different places a 6th harmonic interval leaping down a 4th, creating a 3rd above the melody. So we have that here, and then we also have that right here. And then in both these cases, from this 3rd interval that it creates with the melody, then it leaps back up a 4th to where it started from. This is known as a chordal embellishing tone, as it uses chord tones to embellish the melody. These are typically downward leaps of a 3rd or 4th. This fills in the missing note of a triad. In this case, we can see the notes E and C. You can see that C then leaps down to G and then leaps back up to C. If we think about these notes stacked as a harmonic interval, it reveals the chord of E, G, C. This is simply a C major chord in first inversion. Next, we have the notes F and D. D then leaps down a 4th to A, then it leaps back up a 4th to D. If we stack this harmonically, we see that we have a chord consisting of F, A, D. This is a D minor triad in first inversion. This embellishing tone can be used on the second beat of 3-to-1 exercises as long as they're sounding chord tones and use the pattern of a 6-3-6 and a 5-3-5. Or in other words, if this makes more sense to you, it can form a root position triad or a first inversion triad, but it cannot form a second inversion triad. So if you think about from the root, we have a 5-3-5 creating a root position, or we can have that 6-3-6 creating a first inversion. We can't have a 6-4-6 creating the second inversion. I'm not going to worry about that very much right now because I'm going to talk about that later on in this video. So for now, just know you can use the 5-3-5 pattern or you can use the 6-3-6 pattern, but you cannot use the 6-4-6 pattern. So also make this easier, if you're on a downbeat and you're creating a sixth interval, just remember you can't go down a third on beat 2 to a chord tone. And we're going to see why in a second. Albrechtsberger corrected Beethoven in 2 different places. So Beethoven didn't create any errors, but Albrechtsberger shows him a suggestion to make his implied harmony even stronger. Okay, so let's first listen to this and then we'll analyze it. So Beethoven didn't create any errors, but Albrechtsberger shows him a suggestion to make his implied harmony even stronger. So in this first section here, he changes the C above the first E to a C sharp. This adds the leading tone of the D minor scale. Back at Beethoven's, we can see Beethoven's embellishing tone figure highlights a tonicization of the key of F major. So the first inversion C major chord is highlighting chord 5. This 6-3-6 pattern, then FA implies F major, but then on the next downbeat there's a DI which completes a D minor chord from this FA. So this FA is then completed with a DA. As you can see, the melody in the middle is just going from the 5th and it's leading you down to the root. Can't have this embellishing tone of G anymore because down here it would create the leap of an augmented 4th from C sharp. The changes in the new section help the leading tone while it resolves to D on the next downbeat. Okay, so now if we're thinking in the terms of F major's relative minor and we're thinking of D minor, and then now we're thinking of D harmonic minor, which is what they're usually going to be using in this time period when you were creating harmony here, then we see that in D harmonic minor, E and C sharp are just highlighting chord 7 in first inversion, F and D is highlighting chord 1 in first inversion, and D and F is highlighting chord 1 in root position. So instead of going from chord 5 to 1 and then chord 1 then turns into chord 6, which is known as a deceptive or interrupted cadence. So there's no one here saying that this was something that Beethoven didn't mean to do or he did mean to do, but what we're saying here is that Albrechtsberger corrected this for a reason. The next change occurs on the given melody's 7th note. Beethoven's original 5-6-5 pattern is replaced with an embellishing tone figure of 5-3-5. This has to do with 2 different things and they go hand in hand. First, the perfect 5th of G and D could imply a G major chord in first inversion with a missing 3rd. So that's happening on the downbeat. Then from here, the D creating a 5th goes up 1 step creating a 6th E, and then it steps back down to the 5th D. In terms of consonant intervals, there's no problem with this at all. It uses a consonant neighbor tone to create some stepwise motion, also known as an upper auxiliary tone. The issue is with the harmony. That combined with the tempo. The perfect 5th implies a root position triad with a missing 3rd, in this case a G major chord in first inversion. When you go from the 5th to a 6th, you are no longer implying a root position chord, as 6th intervals only occur in inverted chords. Therefore, the note G stops acting as the root note of the chord and it begins acting as the 3rd of a first inversion E minor chord, so a G missing the B, E, or even worse, the 5th of a second inversion C major chord, G missing the C, E. This means the chord would change 3 times within the 1 pulse of the given melody. In other words, once per beat. And since we're working in 3/4 time, this is an irregular meter here. It's not 4/4 time. Okay, so when you listen to 3/4 time, a lot of times the listener is going to have an experience to where the song's kind of starting on the 1 beat, maybe a little quicker than they anticipate compared to regular songs. Most songs in common time are in 4/4 time, so you have that steady 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, and all of a sudden when you're in a waltz, you have the 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Not only does it do that to the listener, but it creates an irregular meter in itself. So with a kind of irregular meter like this, you don't want to be changing chords a bunch. Albrechtsberger's embellishing tone in comparison creates a slower harmonic rhythm as it uses a sort of mini arpeggio of DBD, which implies a G major chord in first inversion throughout the whole pulse of the given melody. Or again, in other words, the first inversion G major occurs on all 3 beats. Normally in a meter such as 4/4 or 2/2, the neighbor consonant tone would not cause such a problem. Albrechtsberger coaches Beethoven into usually only using 1 implied chord per measure, sometimes 2. Now we can also see at the end of the first change, it also got rid of the other one of Beethoven's consonant neighbor notes. So where we have this D, before we had a D and an A, which then the A went up to a B and back down to the A. Here we can see we have a D and an F creating a third. F leaps up a fourth to B, and then B steps down to A, and then it steps down to G on the downbeat, creating another third. So no more consonant neighbor tone. Which this was doing the same thing where we have the perfect fifth, rising up a step, creating that sixth, and then going back down to the same note where it creates the fifth again, implying different chords on each beat. We can see the point of Albrechtsberger's corrections were not to do with voice leading issues, but instead to strengthen the implied harmony of Beethoven's response and allow him to think more about how he could do this himself. In 3/1, the dissonant neighbor tone is now introduced. This makes sense because now we have 3 notes in our counterpoint versus 1 note in the given melody. This allows us to create a dissonance on beat 2 while still being able to resolve it on beat 3 before it then moves on to the next note on beat 1, which is the downbeat. Similar to a dissonant passing tone, a dissonant neighbor tone is approached by a step and it's left by a step in the opposite direction. So it sounds a lot more complicated than what's actually going on. In other words, from where it starts, it travels up 1 step, and then from there it goes down 1 step, returning to where it originated from. Versus the dissonant passing tone, which is in the middle of an interval of a third, so it's approach and left in the same direction. We notate the dissonances similarly. It's a filled in stemless note head and a slur in between the consonances, but this time it's a dotted slur for the consonances since they are sounding the same note. So remember in 1/1, we were using the dotted to highlight the oblique motion, and here we can see that the dotted note is highlighting that these are using the same note, and there's just that dissonance in the middle, and it's just going up a step compared to what's here, or down a step compared to what's here. So the dissonance acts like an ornament or decoration to the underlying consonant interval that it is within, because it is surrounded by the same consonant interval, the same 2 notes, and it's just decorating that with a little step up and then a step down. Since dissonances act more like a decoration to a single interval, it can slow down the forward momentum of the counterpoint, because this is implying a single decorated interval for the 3 beats. The melody doesn't really go anywhere within the 3 notes, therefore you don't really want to use a lot of dissonant neighbor tones and try not to use them in a row at all. When choosing between an upper neighbor note or a lower neighbor note, consider 2 different things. One is the shape of the melody as it travels to the next downbeat. We can see from our first downbeat, our next downbeat goes down 1 step. In this situation, it's a good time to throw in a neighbor note that goes up, so then the next note can go down a step, and then it can go down a step to your next downbeat. Well, you can see here the difference between this downbeat and this downbeat is this one just goes up a step. So in this case, if we put a neighbor tone that goes down, now it's able to use stepwise motion going down that step, up, and then up to the next downbeat, using steps the whole time. So that's when we have a step difference. Perfect time to do that in 3/1 counterpoint. And the second thing to consider is the implied harmony at the time, or the implied harmony options at the moment. Fuchs does not include the dissonant neighbor tone as a fundamental voice leading dissonance, so you will not find a chapter about 3/1 counterpoint in the Gradus ad Parnassum by Fuchs. Later down the road, it became common practice to teach and learn about the dissonant neighbor tones and its attribution to 3/1 counterpoint. An example of 3/1 counterpoint using 3/2 time is by Herman Roth, where we have counterpoint written below a given melody. This time we use dissonant neighbor tones. We're going to first listen to it and then analyze it. Okay, so we can see the first case of the dissonant neighbor tone, which uses the method just shown before this, where the dissonance occurs on beat 2 of the measure. However, right here you can see a dissonant neighbor tone placed on beat 3 of the measure. This is still acting as a dissonant neighbor tone, and it is still resolved by the downbeat. The thing is, we can see, especially when we create this analytic diagram, that in this situation, the two repeated tones occur in two different measures. And since this is just thinking about modal counterpoint for now, we're just following the simple species counterpoint exercises. We're not going to be allowing this for now. This is something that is allowed later on, but like I said, adding too much stuff at one time can complicate things. It's good to make little baby steps. So for now, we're not going to be doing this in our own exercises. So to really boil this down, you can see the same note F is harmonizing with F here, and then this note D is harmonizing with this F. Then in the middle of that, we have that dissonant passing tone. So to understand what's happening here, the F is creating a consonant 8/6 suspension, while at the same time, within that suspension, it's being decorated with a dissonant neighbor tone. That's rather conflicting, having a consonant 8/6 suspension and then having a dissonant neighbor tone at the same time. We're getting into maybe some rather uncommon grounds here, so suspensions belong to a different contrapuntal exercise. It'd be better just to keep with the tradition of species counterpoint, and that is to isolate each species with its own set of rules. For 3 to 1, we will be interested in the use of the dissonant neighbor tone. Suspensions will be omitted from these exercises to focus on the dissonant neighbor tone. And again, this is an interesting one, because I remember I was saying this is not something that you want to be using all the time. It can slow down the melodic flow. So it's good to practice this, because we're practicing where to use them, where is a good time to use them. And to simplify this, just remember, for these exercises, only use a dissonant passing tone on beat 2 of the measure. Do not use it on beat 3 of a measure. We can begin to do things like adding dissonant neighbor tones on beat 3 when we get into more free forms of counterpoint. Okay, to conclude and to review the rules, consonances can occur on any beat. Dissonant passing tones can occur on beat 2 or 3. Dissonant neighbor tones can occur on beat 2 only. Also, you may use embellishing tones that imply root position or first inversion triads, or in other words, the pattern of 5-3-5 or 6-3-6. Remember, there is no 6-4-6. So here we have the second inversion triad being implied. We're not going to be using this. If you think this seems strict, we'll realize there's rules later on that will allow us to use this. For now, this is just enabling us to just have patterns of thought on a simple level that are creating the best voice leading independence. Okay, now this takes us to cadences. Above, we can use a consonant neighbor note pattern of 6-5-6-8 using scale degrees 7, 6, 7, and 1. So I labeled the 7, but as you can see here, it starts in the same note. So we dip down, we have a 7, dip down to 6, 7, then 1. The cantus progresses from scale degrees 2 to 1. Or also above, we have the pattern of 3, 5, 6, and 8, using scale degrees 4, 6, 7, and 1. So we can see in both these cases, it's leading us up to that leading tone, which then goes up that half step to the cadence. And again, for both these going above, the cantus is going from scale degrees 2 to 1. Below, we can use the pattern of 5, 4, 3, 1, scale degrees 5, 6, 7, and 1 in the cantus, scale degrees 2 to 1 again. The other option for below is using the pattern of 3, 4, 3, 1 in the counterpoint using scale degrees 7, 6, 7, and then 1. We're stepping things up a little bit. The first one is going to be using A major, and the second one is going to be using G minor, and it's going to be written in the bass clef. So we're going to be thinking minor now, and we're going to be reading and writing in the bass clef. I'm going to have some exercises for you at the end and a PDF download in the description of this if you want to download it, print it, or have it on your phone and you can just write on it, whatever you want to do. It'll be downloadable. And now just to conclude and review the analytic diagram, dissonances are going to be filled in with a stemless note head, solid slurs over dissonant passing tones, and dotted slurs over dissonant neighbor tones. If we remove the dissonances from the response, we will see a skeleton of the melody known as a rhythmic reduction. This skeleton will only have consonances that make up a 1-to-1 and a 2-to-1 ratio relationship. Okay, so I've come up with a good plan for you, as well as these different exercises which you can download as a PDF in the description. As you can see, we have 4 exercises in the A major, 4 in the G minor. The only difference is you can see an octave difference between 2 of them on each side. So in A major, we have 2 that are lower, then we have 2 that are higher. So for the lower ones, you're going to be writing counterpoint above. For the higher ones, you're going to be doing counterpoint below. So for the beginning of these exercises, you're going to be doing 2 in A major above, 2 in A major below. And then similar on the next side, we move on to G minor, to where we have the same thing of the octave difference. This time we're in the bass clef and we're thinking about minor. So for the lower version, we're writing counterpoint above it again, and then for the higher version, we're going to be writing counterpoint below it. If you have questions about writing counterpoint in minor and such, just remember that it goes over that in the one-to-one counterpoint video from the beginning. These rules are slowly compounding and building on themselves. So if you slowly build up the rules from 1, 2, and now 3, it's going to make this very easy for you. Because all we're doing is following the rules that we took from 1-to-1 and approaching minor, and now we can apply that to what we're able to do in 3-to-1 counterpoint, combining that with the cadential endings. Establishing a strong cadence is really important for the listener to know that yes, this is a stopped period in the song, it's a pause, or it's the end of the song. It's very important for the listener to understand this. Let's think about what we're doing here with the counterpoint, which is kind of interesting. We're doing a lot of things here that'll help us in a lot of circumstances when we go to composing. So if we think about what we're doing here, when we're composing above A major and we're in the treble clef, it's going to be like we're composing the soprano line above the alto line. Then when we're writing below the A major, it's kind of like, okay, we already have the soprano line and now we're filling in that alto line. Probably a little more useful, probably something you're probably going to run into a little more, because it's really good to build a solid bass and soprano line and kind of fill in the stuff in the middle like a sandwich with the alto and the soprano. A lot of teachers often say it's not that big of a deal if the alto and the soprano lines are rather boring by themselves. It's a whole nother topic though. But if we look here on the bass, we can see that when we're writing above the bass line, it's like adding the tenor. Then when we're writing below, it's like we already have the tenor and we're writing the bass, so these things might come in handy at some points, and they probably will. So it's a good tip here that when you're separating your voices, try to stay with your soprano, alto, and tenor within an octave range. Don't go outside of that, but when you're writing for your bass to your tenor, that difference can be more than an octave. So when you're actually thinking about the intervals themselves from where they start, you can do intervals that exceed the 10th. You go up to the 12th with the tenor to bass, which what I was saying is you're most likely going to want to stay within an octave between the other voices. And within the tenor and bass, doing tenths and twelfths is a lot more reasonable. You find it a lot more. And not only that, but the tenor and bass can be separated by a whole octave a lot of times. I wouldn't worry about that for now, but I would definitely try to include some twelfths, some compound perfect fifths in your bass to tenor to try to practice that, because that's something you're going to find in real music. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this, there's more coming. And if you want to send your response to me, feel free to email it to me. I could either give you direct one-to-one feedback if you want me to analyze it, say if you did it correctly, or I can also include it in my video that'll be coming up soon, where I'll be analyzing some responses and showing where they could be improved. Thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more about music, be sure to check out my other videos and my playlists. I have over 120 videos posted at the moment.